never seen one, but there's always a chance. Weather Bureau wouldn't issue a tornado alert without some good reason.
Hey man, it's a tornado, man. We're in the tornado. Oh!
On May 16th, 2025, a Category 3 tornado ripped through my hometown of St. Louis and caused devastation that many people around the country are becoming too familiar with. 5 people lost their lives, 38 were injured, over $2 billion in property damage was recorded, and over 5,000 building structures were damaged. And of course, the majority of the people who were impacted by this tornado lived in lower income neighborhoods. Many of these people did not have homeowners insurance, as these homes were passed down from generation to generation and were consequently a source of generational wealth that thousands of people across St. Louis now no longer have access to. FEMA was late arriving. The help that they gave was good, but not enough. And this is becoming a common story, whether it be hurricanes, wildfires, extreme drought, flooding, blizzards. The climate is, of course, changing. And this is no longer something that we can debate. This isn't something that we're not so sure about. We know that this is real. And we know that there are solutions that we have to get on top of if we want to have a sustainable future for humankind.
My man's got a heart like a rock cast in the sea. My man's got a heart like a rock cast in the sea. I hate to see that evening sun go down. Yes, I hate to see that evening sun go down. 'Cause my baby is done left this town.
All right, guys, I'm back to Miss Bernice. This is still all the crap in front of her house needs to be cleared away. I think they're coming down the street to possibly clear it. But she is doing well. She says she's eating every day. I'm about to check up on her. And I'm about to start her GoFundMe with her because I don't want any issues with anybody, okay? Here's your update. She's doing good.
Courtney Harris is one of the absolute best community organizers, activists, and volunteers that St. Louis has to offer. She was a tremendous help in putting together this project, and she also was great at giving us some really solid insight into how community organization works, what was happening on the ground after the tornado, and what exactly cities like St. Louis need going forward.
One name right off the bat, Miss Bernice. She's 84 years old. She's been in her home for 60 years. She is waiting on FEMA. She hasn't had electricity. She all she wants to do is watch television. And she heard a few weeks ago that FEMA wasn't coming. There's a lot of misinformation in the community. And we still haven't, felt the effects of FEMA, but it's underway. There's a lot of money coming, but nowhere near enough. And they really are trying to live day by day. And every time it rains, something comes through her roof. Mold. So she's been able, luckily, to get, thank God to the Urban League, actually, 2 weeks in a hotel, and she's able to take a break and take a warm bath again. And it's really hard to watch matriarchs of whole families and 50 years of generational wealth that she was going to pass down to her granddaughter really almost be demolished and never the same. She may just have to move out, and she's trying to maneuver to get to the FEMA um, center. There's a FEMA center at the Shea Fitz Arena, but the Shea Fitz Arena's far away, and her car is what did she say? Jogging, not running.
Yeah.
I love these. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I love her. But it's hard for her to get there, and there's just a lot of barriers in the community that aren't really taken into account when these type of things happen. And it takes for people like Freedom Community Center, the People's Response, um, enormous in O'Fallon Park, for the Culture STL, Black Men Build, Better Family Life. There's different zones being organized and taken care of by the people, solely the people, to make sure that they're going door to door and getting these small needs like tampons, like
That you could totally just overlook because you normally got access to
you
it.
just don't think about it.
Yeah.
You don't think about it. And the survivor's remorse that you get going home after seeing and talking to these people. Because I'm going about 10 minutes down the street.
Was on Thanksgiving Day, and the town of Heber Springs was visited by a cyclone and partly swept away. The people, no doubt, were feasting. They never thought so soon than by a dreadful tornado they'd shortly meet their doom. They saw the storm approaching. The clouds looked low and black, and through that little city it left a dreadful track. They saw the cyclone coming, and it's too sad to relate. The happiest of families there had to separate. They saw the lightning flashing, they heard the thunder roar. Such tears were in that city as never known before.
Jonathan McGee is a business owner in St. Louis, McGee Masonry, a brick and mortar company, and he has firsthand knowledge and experience into fixing the very structures that were so heavily damaged by the tornado that came through St. Louis on May 16th.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the projects that we worked on, they're all obviously historical buildings, right? So they have special terracotta that, it's only been made in this certain period of time. This is over 130 years old. And so a lot of the damage happened on roofs, chimneys, stuff like that, parapet walls. And I mean, completely collapsed into the house. We walked into several properties where the roof or the chimney went through the roof and it's laying halfway in the middle of the living room. You got trees down on the houses. And so these houses, they're built mainly of three different courses of brick, and trees blew through all of that. So um when we get to the houses, right, I mean, there are several instances where you still have the homeowners living in the house and they're trying to collect as much rainwater with buckets while still, the back of their wall is completely ripped off. And so our job when we're going in, because we're typically the first responders if a roofer hasn't already been there, but our goal is to get the property structurally stabilized. So we'll board up windows that have been shattered. We'll remove a lot of the debris in the house. So getting the bricks stacked outside so that we can reutilize that brick, and any small masonry repairs that we can do to help the roofers structuralize the roof, put tarps up there, and just prevent further water damage. Because in this tornado, I mean, yes, the tornado happened on the 16th, but there was also rain for the following week. So it was trying to prevent any further damage from happening.
But what's the general cost like with these building materials, and how much people have to pay out of pocket for that? And just kind of talk a little bit about that process so people can get a good idea of the dollar amount and damage that this takes.
Yeah, so I mean, when we're talking about some of these fuller scope projects that have been hit, I mean, upwards of 15 to $30,000 in damages just with masonry alone. And then you're looking at putting on a new roof, with which could also go from 15 to $30,000 depending on what kind of roof you have. So you're looking at a 60,000. I mean, that's just with exterior work. Then you got water damage that happened on the inside. So it could, a lot of properties where they got more than $100,000 worth of damage just with a single property. And like you said, there was 5 to 10,000 buildings that have been hit in some way or form. There are hidden costs as well, right? Because especially if the homeowner doesn't have insurance, I mean, you got to get a structural engineer in there for a lot of different properties, because, certain walls have collapsed, which could, lead to further damage. Foundations have shifted, you know, and so we need to determine, well, is this building actually fixable, or is the whole thing going to have to come down? And that's where a structural engineer will come in, and possibly an architect, which will obviously add more cost to the property.
Michael McMillan is a guy who, if you don't know, obviously he's the head of the Urban League in St. Louis, but he's also genuinely a man of the people, somebody who's going to have boots on the ground. He's never too good for any suggestions. He's never too busy or too important to help somebody in need in the St. Louis community. And that's why I believe that he is a fantastic person to lead the Urban League in St. Louis. And he gave us great insight into how it was founded and the work that the Urban League does. A lot of people are familiar that there is an urban league in their city, and they may be understanding that it's a place that people can go to get resources, maybe in a time of natural disaster, or just people who are going through a rough time. Maybe they're having a hard time making ends meet. They need food, supplies, things like that. But if you could tell us just kind of a little bit about how Urban League got started, and just more what people can expect if they're ever in need of services like that.
Yeah, so absolutely. So in St. Louis, we're 107 years old. We were actually created out of a tragedy. So we were born to provide resources for people that were victims of the East St. Louis race massacre that happened in 1917. And so we were born to try to give people clothing, food, jobs, education, resources, assistance with healthcare back then as well, and try to get them back on track, because so many families that had been in Illinois that lost everything, very similar to the tornado, but at the time, sadly, because of a racial crisis that happened there. And so many Black people were killed and injured and driven out of their communities and sent to St. Louis. And so that's what actually birthed us as an organization. And then here we are yet again in another tragedy between the tornado and COVID and Ferguson and all these different things that have transpired over the past century. We are prepared to serve and we want to help. When we are not in the midst of a disaster, we are working to try to give people the resources to live their best lives. So we have 60 different programs that, in essence, kind of fall in about four categories. One is, let's say, a basic need. So if you had a job at a company, like a lot of people did during COVID that lost their job, and then you could come here so you could get food from the food pantry, clothes, we could give you assistance to find another job, maybe a scholarship to go back to college or to get a certification for another career. We could put your kids in Head Start, and we could give you rental or mortgage assistance to keep you in your residence. So we want to kind of keep you in a position of stability, but then give you resources to get a new career, get something going for yourself so that you wouldn't have to be a client, but you can then actually take care of yourself and your family.
Hmm.
In addition to those kind of two basic needs and then also empowerment, we also have begun doing community development activities like renovating this headquarters
Hmm.
that had been in the need of an infusion of capital and renovation, and then the plaza behind us, the greenhouse, and what are now 25 different facilities we have across the region. In addition to that, we also have a public safety division. Because if you think of St. Louis, we talked about earlier, there's a reality and then there's a perception of crime. And that has a negative impact basically on everything that we do.
Hmm.
And so, how do we fix that? So, our public safety team, they run into the neighborhoods that have the highest crime incidents to try to give people hope, opportunity, resources, and the ability to kind of get themselves out of situations that would otherwise put themselves, quite frankly, in the penitentiary or something that would be damaging to them and their family.
How is Urban League involved with local government in terms of like where funding comes from for the supplies and materials? And then is it kind of a mixture of like government grants, or is it kind of like all privately funded through donors and things like that?
So here, I would say 75% of our annual budget are city, county, state, and federal contracts. And then the rest that we are blessed to receive is United Way funding, and then corporate and individual and family foundation support every single year that help us try to provide resources to people. And I totally agree with you about the fact that we have to be engaged in our local governmental communities. We have to be educated. We have to vote. We have to manifest, our voices. And where else would you give anyone 33% or so of your paycheck and have no opinion about what they do with it? You wouldn't do it with a family member. You wouldn't do it with a friend. You wouldn't do it with a significant other. But so often people pay 33 or so percent in taxes and don't vote and don't have any opinion whatsoever that they are willing to express to the actual leaders in government. So it's incumbent on us, especially the next generation, to get out there to educate people, to get them involved. Because when you look at the biggest concerts in St. Louis, more people will go to that than vote for mayor of the city of St. Louis, who is the chief executive of the entire city and the most visible elected official for the entire region.
Mick Austin is a good friend of mine. We graduated high school together, and he ended up being the lead of development at the Urban League. He gave us a really good inside look into his job, his day to day interactions with the community, how funds are raised, how the Urban League goes about meeting the needs of its clientele, and how anybody can get involved.
I have always been very service oriented, just growing up here in St. Louis, growing up on the north side, which is very blighted, poverty stricken. And so I feel like it's always been in me to be of service, whether it be through high school, certain programs like the Brotherhood, our different societies we're part of to help move things, good societies, put it out there,
Yeah.
to help move things in a positive way. But just seeing the neighborhood look a certain way and wanting to be that change. I always wanted to leave St. Louis at the same time because you always hear there's more opportunities outside of St. Louis. But one thing that's always kept me here is people around me and me inspiring them. Even when I want to leave, my neighbors now, they see me, put on these suits and come to work here at the Urban League, and they're like, "Oh, Mr. Mick, man, let me get $1 million." I'm like, I ain't got $1 million, my brother, but
Yeah.
you got the power to make it happen. And hopefully, you seeing me inspires you to do that. So I think service was always in me. And the Urban League itself was somewhat of a calling. They gave me a scholarship from Cardinal Ritter to go to Morehouse, a partial scholarship. And again, I didn't think I was coming back, but somehow, some way, God brought me back here to the north side. And I was like, well, I got to be involved. I'm going to be in the city. So whether that's, in a nonprofit aspect or a political aspect or, grassroots aspect, fundraising, however I can be involved, that's how I feel about, this city. I love this city.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little bit about me.
Yeah. And I think too, even though, you said that you wanted to leave, you did leave.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You spent time in Atlanta, you spent time in China, you spent time in New York. So, for me, as you know, I was living in out in New Jersey, New York area from 2016 to 2024, and my appreciation for St. Louis grew tremendously when I came back.
I would say a lot of disinvestment has happened, over our lifetimes, from people just leaving the city themselves, like I said, whether they're going to a different city or going to the suburbs. And because of that disinvestment, I think a lot of poverty and crime has, arisen. St. Louis is always at the top of the list as far as, most dangerous city. And of course, that's per capita. But a lot of that has to do with access to opportunities. A lot of times, even just taking it back to the young brother seeing me walk out the house, not seeing that, you don't know what's possible. And so if I can just be there for somebody else, I'm always willing to, hopefully inspire others. Coming from the north side, the crime rate, not even crime rate, the unemployment rate is 42%. The national unemployment rate, I think it hovers between 3 to 9%. If it's a 9, it's great. It's oh my gosh, 9% unemployment. That's it's a recession.
Great Depression levels,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But you talk about the black community in St. Louis, and not just St. Louis, the other major metropolitans. You're talking about 30 to 40%, not unemployment. How come we aren't looking at that with the same lens of depression levels? People are already depressed, in ways financially, which contributes to being depressed mentally, emotionally, and of course systemically. We feel these things, and so I've seen that all my life. I've seen the blightedness, I've seen the lack of ownership because of redlining, because of other financial impairments and whatnot. And so we're starting to see a little bit of a shift, amongst people in our generation and even Gen Z, who are trying to become more literate in ways to contribute and also, to kind of fight the systems itself. So if I can be a leader in that, however I can be, that's my goal. And I love being, being back here in St. Louis and being of service to my people, into the greater St. Louis region ultimately. But, where I'm at now as the director of development, it's very much meeting with the CEOs, and the financial heads of companies to gain the necessary capital to keep the Urban League and our 65 plus programs, afloat to help, St. Louis community. Last year, we helped about 205,000 individuals, whether it be with housing, with workforce development, just education itself. Head Start is one of the largest programs in America, not just in St. Louis. And so my day to day is, definitely on the phone, trying to get the funds, or the in-kind donations, or the people time, volunteer time that we can contribute to the north side and to the west side as well, to the poverty-stricken places of St. Louis itself to make St. Louis a better place. I'm inspired really by seeing the work come to fruition. With this recent tornado that happened, May 16th, that was hopefully a once in a generation, experience, but it hit the worst area that it could in St. Louis City. A part of the city that was already, again, poverty stricken, already blighted, already forgotten about, just many systemic factors. And now it's like, are we gonna keep the light on what's happening here? Is it keep the momentum going? And so I think I'm inspired by Malcolm McMillan, president and CEO of the Urban League, because he's really on the ground in the fight, making it happen. I'm also inspired by the community coming together, us willing to come together, whether it be, the elected official or the CEO or, somebody up the corner, somebody in the grocery store, somebody just willing to put their heads together, remove their differences, and like, okay, this is for the greater St. Louis, not just the next year, not just next month, or the next decade, hopefully, over the next 100 years, but really you have to have a 100-year plan. When I was in New York, I met a gentleman who talked about that. That kind of had astonished me. I'm like, oh, 100 years? I ain't never thought about that. He's like, we got to start thinking like that. Not just, planting seeds for yourself, planting the seeds for trees that you won't get shade from. So I'm kind of.
I like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So that inspires me in the work that I do, knowing that hopefully it's somewhat selfless work. And that, people that I will never see will benefit from the work, benefit from me being around, because I feel like I'm benefiting from those who came before me.
Area code 314. St. Louis, Missouri, on the banks of the Mississippi. It's here, on the way north from New Orleans, that the blues stayed for good. Sports and breweries, cereals and chemicals, and the arch. The Gateway Arch. Even today, when it's all finished, you look at it and you say to yourself, it couldn't be done. But there it is. The gateway to the West. 630 feet of stainless steel. Just standing there, tall and proud. And you can even ride up one side and down the other. That's a trip you really ought to take. But please, phone ahead for your rooms before you head for the arch. The park can be mighty cold.
One of the things that makes it very difficult to address these types of issues in St. Louis is actually its fragmentation and the fact that the city and the county limits are separated functionally. In fact, St. Louis has 90 independent municipalities, 57 police departments, 81 municipal courts, 43 fire districts, 52,000 pages of ordinances, and $2.3 billion annually to keep all of this up. And this really plans out to be a waste of money. In fact, Better Together research shows that these governments cost the taxpayers approximately $1,800 per capita when contrasted with the per capita cost of just over $1,200 for the same services in Indianapolis, Marion County, Indiana, and an even lower $1,100 per capita in Louisville, Jefferson City, Kentucky. And so these are some of the things that make it very difficult to pass sweeping legislation, whether it be how to address climate change issues, natural disaster, or pretty much anything in the city that the bulk or the majority of people want done, because it has to go through so many municipalities. And so that in and of itself makes it very difficult to address these issues. And it's important that we learn how our local governments work and operate, because at the federal level, there's so much partisanship and so much corruption that it's just going to be nigh impossible to get any type of sweeping legislation passed. And that's why we got to focus locally. And that's why it's so important for all of us to do our diligence so that we can understand how our local governments actually function.
St. Louis. They call it Greater St. Louis, spreading from MacArthur Bridge out past the Missouri and the Merrimack. When you've been away, it's good to get back home. It's familiar. You know the buildings, you know the streets. It's your home, your city. But it's a big city with streets you've never walked, with houses you've never entered. People you've never seen. This little girl is just as much a part of your city as the neighbor's girl you wave to on your way to work every morning. Of course, if you saw her as often as you see your neighbor's girl, if you knew she had pneumonia, you'd want to help her get the medical care she needs. But with only one pair of eyes, you can't see all the sick little girls in your city. Nor can you see the woman who lives alone, no longer cared for, no longer caring. She is your neighbor too. And if you knew about her and about all the others also alone, you'd try to help. Her friendless room is as much a part of St. Louis as city and county. Of course, you'd try to help this family, and the one down the street, and the one in the next block, if you knew, and if you knew how, and if you knew who needs help first, who needs help the most, and if you had what they need to give them.
Shamim Clark Hubbard is the alderperson of the 10th Ward in St. Louis, and somebody whose job got a lot more busy after May 16th. She gave us some really good information into what people on city council do and how anybody can take advantage of the services offered by city council.
I call myself, coin myself, Alder Lady of the 10th
Yeah.
10th Ward in the city of St. Louis. So as Alder people, as the Board of Aldermen in the city of St. Louis, we are the legislative branch of government. So we have our administrative branch, which is our mayor, and then we have the legislative branch, which is the Board of Aldermen. So on a day-to-day, the legislating, drafting, passing, carrying laws, ordinances in the city of St. Louis is our role. But for me, because of the community service piece, that is what I'm very near and dear to. I like to say on a good day, I'm a very good secretary for the 22,000 residents in the 10th ward. So that means being a liaison, a conduit for them a direct connect for them to citizens services, uh, day-to-day quality of life needs as a resident of the city of St. Louis.
What gaps have you seen in terms of like the resources that people in your community
Mm.
actually have access to and what they could have access to if things move more efficiently?
So what I can say is that's the perfect word, right? Access. And I can use the perfect example. When you talk about access to resources, we can use insurance, for example. So we have constituents that have great insurance, were covered, and again, are getting reimbursed, maybe getting housed, long-term housing, maybe getting things repaired already, maybe already getting their funding to get things to move forward. Then we have people who were either or underinsured, which are two very broad things, but are very big disparities in our communities. You can feel just as uninsured being underinsured in a community like this because we have people that have been paying thousands of dollars for years for insurance, but never knew that it wouldn't cover a tornado, never knew
Mm.
that it wouldn't cover wind damage. So sometimes making a choice, maybe even for this or pay my insurance. I'm paying my insurance. I think I'm doing the right thing. My house gets devastated by a tornado, and the insurance adjuster comes out weeks later because that's another issue. I have some people whose insurance adjusters came right out. I have some people whose insurance adjusters kept giving excuse after excuse about why they weren't coming in that neighborhood or at that time, right? And then when they got there, they found out that they were woefully underinsured, the same response as being uninsured. So the access to that and the education around that, again, is something that's supposed to be proactive. So I would say for homeowners insurance, renters insurance, things of that nature, it's on the property owner or the tenant. There's no monopoly on who is the insurer here for the area. But what I will say is that clearly there were times when certain insurance companies would not insure in certain areas. Um, and that's you can tell that by who has insurance and the companies they have now.
Mhm.
We can also tell that by there's a little things like in St. Louis, there's a lot of flat roofs. And so I've had reports of certain companies, insurance companies telling constituents, we don't insure flat roofs, or make it so they can kind of use different
Ways to where they'd be
avenues,
like,
yeah,
we not gonna
to
pay, basically.
discriminate.
Yeah.
Let's just say it, to
Yeah.
discriminate.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's again obvious in what's that's looking like in the response. Again, what I mentioned about some of my constituents saying their insurance adjuster still hadn't shown up as of last week. That was going on 4 weeks. Then I have some people who said my insurance adjuster came out the next day and had a check. So that's a difference in the companies, but that's also a difference in the relationship with the property owner and the insurance company. L- Governments, legislatively, we don't have any purview over a person's individual uh, access to their insurance. At the federal level, right? They can hold insurance companies accountable. And we did hear from one of our senators, Josh Hawley,
Mhm.
that he was going to hold insurance companies. When he came down here on ground zero the first weekend, he said he was going to hold insurance companies accountable in this situation. So, and he gave out his number and he said, if you're having problems with your insurance company, call me. And so I'm not sure if people have been able to lean into that when they need it, but I've absolutely heard the complaints and concerns from their experience with their insurance companies thus far. And so then they have now, since we were declared at the times earlier when we weren't declared, it was iffy. But now that we've been declared and they can reach into FEMA and they can access SBA and all the different things that come with the disaster declarance, then that's where we are being able to move forward now.
Have people had any type of real significant access other than like the general $750, or like did it take like what was that general response like? Because I mean, with the current administration, there's a lot of efforts to just cut pretty much everything across the administrative state in general. So, what is kind of your perspective of people's access to those resources?
Thank you for that question. One is a big concern. We know that we waited, begged. I don't know another word for it to be able to get this access and being declared. They've been here. Let's see, 4 days. So
Mm.
I would say that the FEMA response. I'm sorry. The
Okay.
FEMA response in this 4 days, that I've been able to access and connect with my constituents, it's all I know. This is my first experience with FEMA, and it's been good. They've been very responsive. They've been on the ground. I went to the offices that they set up today, very prepared. 4 or 5 of them sitting there waiting for people to come in. Um, but there's also ways that you can do it without even having to go down there, right? There's about 3 or 4 different ways. And they send us as legislators, they send us a daily count of the people that have signed up for FEMA. They send us a daily count of, what we need to do differently, how we can reach different demographics. Are we reaching the mark? So and for us as legislators in turn, we should take the responsibility very serious about connecting people to FEMA and reporting, because the more reports we get to FEMA, it not only justifies the initial declarance, but could possibly elevate us to some additional resources.
Yeah.
So I'll say that FEMA has been doing a good job. And they were asked specifically, how did they feel about coming down here and responding, knowing that they have we're working under administration that doesn't even think that FEMA is a need. And
Hmm.
they said we show up every day knowing we are in need because we've been doing this work, and we don't let that bother us. And as I stated earlier, I wouldn't know the difference. They've been hands down very responsive, and for any questions that I've had and any connections that I've needed to make. So I'm grateful for FEMA being here, because to your point, for some people that meant an immediate little over 700 some dollars that they could access for a day-to-day need, and then preparing them for the other resources that they can get down the line.
So that,
Listen, if not for FEMA, my constituents that are or underinsured wouldn't have anywhere else to go right now.
yeah.
They wouldn't. That's just the bottom line. And on top of that, that being declared as the natural disaster and FEMA coming in is also what opens the door for SBA and
Hmm.
the access of resources there. So without that, I don't know any municipality, county, state. I don't know how somebody would deal with this without without the departments like FEMA stepping in. I don't.
The truly dynamic American cities are those that are coming to grips with the problem of outmoded structures. Increasingly, we are seeing large-scale demolition as the first step in building modern cities. The need of the hour is to acquire plottage by merging narrow lots for a new start. Getting needed space in our cities for modern structures is the only way to meet the competitive force of growing suburban strength. Some of our demolition is an easy process because of much light wood construction. Often, the substance of our urban structures is such as to resist the power of the demolition hammer. As a people, however, we are steadfast as we tackle problems, and the hammer of demolition will be sure to swing with determination. In this jet age, events move fast, faster indeed than we sometimes realize, and our progress is certain to be steady as we clear away the structures that block progress.
A Game is a recording artist from St. Louis who grew up on the north side, the area of St. Louis that was the most heavily damaged by the tornado. He gave us some really good insight into what it was like growing up in that community and how real the community is and why these areas are so worth the investment and so worth everybody putting in an effort to save. My father grew up on the north side. He grew up off Terry, and when he was growing up, it was completely different. That was before everything shifted out of the city.
Right. He saw it pre-white flight.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about how Beaumont used to be an all white high school.
Yeah,
You
Wellston,
know?
like literally, it's a Black Wall Street event this weekend in the historic Wellston Loop. But when it
Yeah.
was the historic Wellston Loop, it was predominantly white.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah. So
predominantly
just
white.
those demographics have really shifted, but I think it's important. And a lot of what I want to talk to you about is, your experience growing up on the North Side. But what was really great about it? You know what I'm saying? Because I think that, despite the fact that you have a lot of displacement and a lot of, well, lack of economic opportunity in places like this, we're still dealing with human beings. So
Yeah,
you got higher crime rates, but that's not unique to places like that. So just walk us through
right. I
walk
think
us through what it was like growing up out there, and talk about like some of the people who really positively impacted your life, especially in hindsight, that you can look back and think, man, that was
yeah.
great.
Yeah, I'm literally writing. I was writing about it. Like I'm writing kind of like a particular record where I'm kind of just like reflecting on my upbringing in general. And I stayed a lot of different places on the north side, but one of the most impactful times in my life is my time on Harris, right across the street from O'Fallon Park. And what I was writing, I was like, I said my grandpa house used to feel like public housing, 4 generations, one roof, 2 floors. I didn't even know, like, until I went outside, I didn't know I was poor. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Once you go around, like, you start realizing, like, oh, I live in the hood, but it's so much community, like on my block in particular, you know what I'm saying? Like, Jamie stayed a few doors down. He kind of like, he had a hilarious reputation in the hood, neighborhood. You got, then right next door to me, you got Mr. and Mrs. Moore. Like, they's like another set of grandparents for me. You know what I'm saying? They passing out, you feel me, ice cream and bun pops. I'm going in their crib for whether it's, Trayon and them got a party, or again, they giving out freeze pops or whatever. A few doors down, I got Ray and I got Richard. You know what I'm saying? They basically my cousins. I'm going everywhere with them. We playing basketball everywhere you could be. We in the park 24/7. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was such a sense of community that I had. Like, I legitimately had a village around me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would say, like, these days, I don't know even when I'm home on the north of these days, like when I stay on Lee, I don't know my neighbors particularly well, if at all. Even where I am now in Atlanta, I don't know my neighbors well, if at particularly at all. But during that time, like, I knew everybody. Like, I could go over people's houses. People could watch me. Like, I was in my own community. Like, it definitely was that sense of, like, again, just got to keep repeating it, community. I think that's a large part of what started to kind of lead, like that just general sense of community. But when you think about the fact that my grandfather was on that same street for generation after generation, so you kind of it's built in, like it's kind of baked in. So even if they didn't know each other initially and they grew to love and learn one another, by the time that I was starting to be raised, like, I inherited all of that time spent and had a certain sense of the village that I don't think that many people get to have today. Then you also include the fact that there was still schooling, around. Like, again, Beaumont did exist, you know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't like a whole bunch of kids having to do the DCA program. My sister went to Yateman. I went to McKinley, which was on the south, but a lot of the kids from my neighborhood went to McKinley. Like, we took the bus to the school, or we took the bus to Dewey. Like, the people that lived in my neighborhood, we all went to the same schools. Like, so again, I just really got to overemphasize one, community, and then two, the community was so like intertwined. And again, bro, I didn't realize that I was poor. It took a lot of years for me to realize, like, 4 generations in one house was, like, to some extent, and especially where we stayed at, was like a telltale sign of not having a lot of money. Like, this was circumstantial, not like purely because this is what we desired to do.
But
But
you
yeah,
happy.
huh?
But you was happy.
As hell. Like, it just didn't realize it. Like, I had everything that I needed. You know what I'm saying? Like,
The inspiration and dedication of Martin Matthews, Hubert Dickey Ballantyne, and others who devoted so much time and energy, you, your neighbors, local government, and businesses have moved this club from the shade of a convenient tree to a storefront, and now to this multi-purpose and multi-million-dollar magnificent building. My hat is off to you. And as your project has grown, corporations based here and around the country, companies like Monsanto, Anheuser-Busch, and Emerson Electric have joined your effort. Enrollment has grown from, I understand, 30 to more than 2,000 boys and girls, and has served more than 30,000 St. Louis young people. Your experience, that in New York and other examples around the country, make it clear that we don't have to turn to the federal government to fill every need. Don't misunderstand. Government has a legitimate role in aiding citizens, people particularly who can turn nowhere else for support. Business, volunteer organizations, and our churches can't take over all of America's responsibilities. But our economy nearly foundered on the rocky misconception that government bore those responsibilities alone. And too many of us, not these gentlemen here, began saying, well, let government do it, instead of doing the things that we used to do for each other. All Americans share in these responsibilities, and we call on every resource, every strength, every bit of individual imagination to fulfill our obligations together. I applaud the people of this city for making this tremendous success story possible. I wish all America could stand where I am now, looking out at all of you, you young people, with your hopes, your dreams, because of the cooperation of the people in this city who've given you a chance for a real and a bright and a prosperous future. I wish America, all of it, could see these positive, practical results of neighbor helping neighbor. And if they could, every American would be as convinced as I am that the people of this country are a good and giving people capable of accomplishing great deeds. As a matter of fact, I think I'll leave a note for future presidents suggesting what to do when they need a little inspiration. Go to St. Louis.
Sig alert, sig alert, sig alert. We interrupt this program for a special announcement. Tornado warnings have been issued for the St. Louis area.
Because of climate change, we have intensified weather patterns that all of us have experienced firsthand. Even me being from St. Louis, there's no coastline, no ocean, so we don't experience hurricanes, we don't really have wildfires. But I remember when I was a kid, winters were colder, it snowed more, white Christmases, like in the good old holiday music and all those holiday songs, were a real thing. Now it's becoming more and more of a rarity. And unfortunately, we live in a climate where the truth is debated, undeniable truth. Scientists have been telling us about how human beings and our activity is enhancing and speeding up the process of climate change and how detrimental that is to our survival. But because of corruption, we ignore this. So it's worth at least reiterating a little bit how climate change is making these weather patterns worse, whether it be more severe droughts because of higher temperatures, which leads to less rain, and those droughts lead to more wildfires, wildfire season being longer, more devastating, more widespread because of increasing temperatures and rising sea levels. We have more and frequent hurricanes, stronger hurricanes, because those conditions make it easier for hurricanes to form. We have increased flooding and heavier rainfall because with a warmer atmosphere, you have more moisture being held in the air, which leads to more intense rainfall, more and intense flooding and landslides. So these are issues that all of us are experiencing all around the country and all around the world. And it's not something that we can continue to ignore if we want to have a future at all. The tragedy of Hurricane Katrina may be one of the greatest examples of human error and flaw and just laziness and not updating our infrastructure when we knew that this was going to be an issue. We knew that one day there was going to be a hurricane that was too big for the levees to handle. And that's exactly what happened. Hurricane Katrina ended up being one of the deadliest and costliest U.S. Natural disasters on record, with estimated costs exceeding $125 billion and at least 1,392 people dead, from over 500,000 homes damaged or destroyed, and over 80% of New Orleans was flooded because of those levee failures. Over 1 million people were displaced. Now, think about that on a global scale. We're talking about and focusing on the United States for this particular project, but think about how these types of weather patterns are going to impact migration, are going to impact immigration, crises of people not having access to drinking water, crises of people whose homes were completely destroyed and there not being a system in place to deal with that. This is the world we live in now. And unfortunately, this is the world that we're heading for at very fast speeds, because our politicians are not acting to prepare us for these future disasters. Now it's time to take a look at some stats for just how much damage these natural disasters cause on a yearly basis. This information is coming from the National Centers for Environmental Information, which is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Overall, hurricanes, tropical cyclones are the most costly of the weather and climate disasters. And this is from 1980 to 2024. This is good data here. The U.S. sustained at least 403 weather and climate disasters where overall damages reached or exceeded $1 billion. The total cost of these 403 events exceeds $2.9 trillion. And here's a bit more of a breakdown of that. Droughts with an average cost of $11.5 billion per event. Wildfires with an average cost of $6.4 billion per event. Flooding with an average cost of $4.5 billion per event. Winter storms with an average cost of $4.3 billion per event. Freezes with an average cost of $4.2 billion per event. And severe storms of other kinds with an average cost of $2.5 billion per event. Now, again, this is just unsustainable. It's going to happen, but we have to build a better infrastructure system in order to address this. Otherwise, more and more and more people are just going to continue to die.
In the drought country, entire towns go dry, except for one single well. Life revolves around that well. Water. Water is doled out, counted by the bucket. As though it were milk or food, water becomes a commodity. It takes on new value. People claim it, haul it, treasure it. There is a new delivery man in these towns, the water carrier. He goes from door to door, distributing the water.
Here's a bit more numbers on how the $150 billion price tag per year from climate change and natural disasters is really broken down. And so $150 billion is more than Morocco's gross domestic product last year. It's about the net worth of Larry Ellison, the co-founder of Oracle, enough to cover approximately 5 weeks worth of Social Security payments for all recipients as of September, according to CNN estimates. More than what the U.S. government distributed to the 41 million people who received food stamps in 2022, according to data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it's equal to about 9% of the total student loan debt in the United States, according to the New York Federal Reserve's quarterly report on household debt and credit. Again, this information is from 2024, so it's still very relevant today.
Earlier in the day, he visited North Carolina, touring areas still reeling from the damage caused by Hurricane Helene last September. There, Trump said he would sign an order that could overhaul or scrap the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Said, I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away, and we pay directly, we pay a percentage to the state, but the state should fix this.
FEMA currently independently reimburses governments for recovery efforts such as debris removal and gives stopgap financial assistance to individual residents.
Not only do agencies like FEMA, which is short for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, not have the adequate resources to fully address climate change and natural disasters, but influence and corrupt dollars from corporate America through specifically the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, but more heavy on the Republican side, are constantly trying to dismantle FEMA. So let's look a little bit at how much more FEMA has been putting their resources into natural disaster response and a little bit of how the Trump administration has been rolling back FEMA's ability to operate. So according to the GAO, the number of disasters that FEMA is managing more than doubled in the last 7 years. This is between 2016 and 2023, from 30 disasters in 2016 to 71 disasters in 2023. And in that time, in 2017, they deployed 3,331 employees. And after 2017, 7,113 on average. In 2024 alone, FEMA obligated $35 billion in funds in state local governments for immediate disaster response and cleanup, as well as $29 billion to repair public buildings and infrastructure. Billions more were provided directly to disaster survivors, including $385 million just to North Carolinians affected by Hurricane Helene. We go deeper. More than 400 AmeriCorps staff and volunteers were deployed in the aftermath of the January megafires that destroyed thousands of homes and businesses and killed 30 people. This is in California. They helped 26,000 households affected by the fires and packed 21,000 food boxes. But in April, the agency placed about 90% of its staff on immediate leave. After the fires, the Small Business Administration contributed $2 billion in disaster loans for renters, businesses, and nonprofits. And in March, the Trump administration announced cuts to 43% of the agency's workforce. 43% cuts to that agency's workforce. One of the only agencies that can fully respond to these incidents. But again, there's just not enough resources to really clean up and to really address future natural disasters so that we don't have to keep spending so much money. Instead, we need to invest our money into systems that can better shield us from these disasters. The administration, this current Trump 2.0 administration, has fired hundreds of FEMA employees and offered deferred resignations. And according to reports, they ended their door-to-door canvassing in disaster areas. And they laid off nearly 2,000 employees and gave them buyouts. Now, luckily, federal judges have been saying no to Donald Trump at a lot of these turns. But again, with FEMA being one of the only organizations that we have to respond to these natural disasters, FEMA always being under attack, and in general, FEMA not having the proper resources to fully address these issues is a major problem in and of itself.
There are already people who are saying that we really can't make fundamental change. There are people who are saying, well, you can't bring the deficit down, or well, then nobody will hang in there and make these tough budget cuts the president's proposing, or well, you can't really reform the health care system, even though we're paying more and getting less for ours than any country on the face of the earth. I'm tired of all the naysayers. I think we can make some changes, but we need your help. We need your help in two ways. Number one, we need you to show up like this, and we need you to tell your members of Congress that we will support you if you make the honest, tough, hard decisions. We know we didn't get into this mess overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight, but we cannot keep doing the same old thing. The price of doing the same thing is higher than the price of change. The second thing you can do is to support your members of Congress by demanding real political reform that will protect them in making courageous changes. Tell them you want a campaign finance reform bill that will limit the cost of congressional campaigns, limit the influence of special interests, and open this process to all people. Tell them you want something done to make sure all of the lobbyists in Washington have to register and report on their activities. 2/3 of them don't.
Since we've talked a little bit about just how much corruption goes into the political process in the United States. Let's take a look at how much money gets funneled directly from big oil companies into the pockets of politicians and political action committees. We're going to look at a study from Yale, Open Secrets number trackers, and Statista. So here from a Yale study, we see that the fossil fuel industry spent $219 million getting this new government in. So let's break these numbers down. The oil and gas industry gave about $24 million in campaign contributions to the members of the U.S. House and Senate expected to be sworn in, and this is from January of this year. And we got $26 million, 88% of that money going directly to Republicans. So again, the fossil fuel industry absolutely lines the pockets of the Democratic Party, nowhere near to the same extent as it does the Republican Party. And we're going to look at some of these numbers over the years at that difference. So here we have a direct chart, $26 million, $2,275,457 going directly to the president, over $7.7 million going to the Senate, 92% of that money going to Republicans, 8% of that money going to Democrats, $16 million, $16,267,139, 85% of that going to Republicans, and 15% to Democrats. And here's a bit more of a breakdown. In the 2023 to 2024 election cycle, the oil and gas industry gave $219,079,058. Most of that money coming from political action committees and dark money sources. Again, these numbers, I mean, how can the public compete with this? We can't compete with this. This is why the only way to address, I mean, let alone all the other issues that we have in our education system, our health insurance system, without getting money out of politics, we simply cannot compete with corporate dollars. So now let's go ahead and take a look. This is from Open Secrets, right? So we're going to check these numbers out. And this is a bit more of a breakdown of what we just looked at. $1,925,700 to Democrats, $11,089,723 to Republicans. Again, this is from oil and gas political action committees, 86 political action committees. I mean, really think about how easy it is to corrupt our system. You know, we have laws that make it so that you can't give money directly to candidates if you're a corporation, but you can give money to political action committees. But see, those have limits and rules. So if you want to get around that, you got super political action committees. Then you got dark money groups. And here we have a breakdown again from Coke Incorporated, Chevron, Phillips, Marathon Petroleum, 0 to Democrats from Coke, over 1.6 mil to Republicans. And it's like this across the board. You know, just way some of them are equal, but for the most part, it's just absolutely lopsided in favor of this money going to the Republican Party. And here we're going to take a look at Statista, at how these numbers have changed over time. So let me pull this up here for everybody. So this is from 1990 until 2024. The blue is the Republican Party, the black is Democratic Party. And all the way throughout, other than basically 1990, it hasn't been close. You know, look at how much higher this is here in 2012, 61.57 to the Republicans, to the Democratic Party, 7.51. And it stays this way down here. Republicans way up here. 2016, 58.94. Democrats, 8.83. 2018, 45.63 to the Republicans, 7.23 to the Democrats. And this is the biggest year here in 2020 with 69.52 to Republicans and 13.42 to Democrats. And again, it stays like this consistently. And that is just really the best example of what we're truly up against, because we have the information. Scientists have been telling us that climate change is real. They've been telling us that we're contributing to the speed at which climate is changing. For decades, we know this to be factual. So there's really not much point in debating this. It's more important that we look at where the corruption's coming from, how much money it adds up to, and really figuring out a way to get money out of politics, but also encouraging our politicians to actually invest into our infrastructure so that we can have a future at all. Cenk Uygur is a well-known progressive anchor, progressive activist who's been involved in creating organizations like Justice Democrats to help get progressive candidates elected into Congress. He's also well known for his insights and his war against the corruption machine. I sat down and I spoke with him about how corruption in the US federal government works and what people can do about it.
So we started losing our democracy back in 1976 and 78. So the Supreme Court made a couple of decisions at that point that said that corporations were people and they had the freedom of speech rights that human beings have, inalienable rights given to them by their creator, according to our Constitution and Declaration of Independence. And obviously, that's absurd. We're their creators. They don't have any inalienable rights. But the Supreme Court got taken over by corporations, basically. And they actually launched that plot back in 1971. A guy named Lewis Powell wrote a memo saying we should take over the Supreme Court. And then Nixon said, what a brilliant idea. I'm going to put you on the Supreme Court. And he did. And he was the deciding vote in one of those decisions. So since then, corporations have been able to spend unlimited money in politics. Citizens United shot a dead horse. It shot it with a Gatling gun, so really ripped it to shreds. But now they can buy almost any seat in the country. And when I say they, I mean any set of donors, any set of lobbyists. Big Pharma buys almost all of our politicians. That's why we can't negotiate drug prices. Big Oil still gets $17 billion in subsidies. APAC helps control our foreign policy. And the list goes on and on. And so the Democratic Party eventually got seduced by this. It's chapter 4 of my book, Justice is Coming. And it was inevitable. Once the Republicans started taking infinite money from business interests, the Democrats felt like they had to keep up. So they started taking infinite money from corporate interests. And next thing you know, both parties were completely owned by corporate interests. So now the problem is in the money in politics, but the answer is also there, which is that if you can actually fix that problem, we can go back to how this country was between 1938 and 78. Now, in that era, there were a ton of problems. It's not like we lived in Shangri-La, right? But on the economic front, because bribery had not been legalized yet, we had the strongest economic growth and created the biggest middle class the world has ever seen. That's what America looks like without corruption. So if we can get money out of politics, then we can go back to actually serving the American people and being a democracy.
So, what are some of the kind of key moments that you can recall or remember when the Democratic Party either failed to deliver in moments of huge opportunity? You know, like we could have passed a big bill, we could have done more with a budget bill, or there was just an opportunity to really stand up, and they just dropped the ball completely. And then
Yeah.
also, you know, just an example of how the Democrats have failed to be an opposition party. So, like, what are some of the key moments that you can recall in recent history that's happened?
So for the last 30 years, all I've ever heard from Democrats is there's nothing we could do. And they always use the same excuse. Oh, we don't have enough votes. Oh, there's the filibuster. Oh, there's the parliamentarian. And if you're new to this, you might think, well, I mean, they really didn't have 60 votes in the Senate. They only had a slight majority in the Senate and in the House. And yeah, they had all those branches in the White House under Biden. But really, what could they do? Well, there's two ways to show that that's just not true, right? And that defense is super weak. Number one, having covered it for 30 years, I've seen them have gigantic majorities. Obama had a filibuster-proof 60 votes in the Senate, which is in this day and age unbelievable.
Right, it
Unbelievable.
hardly ever happens, right?
Yeah. And what did he do with it? He had the House, he had a filibuster-proof Senate, he had the White House, and he barely did anything with it. So they passed the Affordable Care Act. It was better than what we had, but before it was called Obamacare, it was called the Romney Care. And Romney literally passed the same plan when he was governor of Massachusetts. And that plan actually comes from the Heritage Foundation, the same people who put together Project 2025. That plan wasn't meant to help solve the healthcare problem in America. It was meant to put a Band-Aid on it so you didn't complain too much. And it had, and remember, if you remember, a mandate that you buy from private insurance, because it was written by private insurance and drug companies. So as it was a release valve, so we didn't get into a full revolt, because at the time people were furious about getting blocked from because of pre-existing conditions, and the other ways that corporations had tightened the vice too much on healthcare at the time, right? So they do that release valve, but that's all they did. You know, the minimum wage is still at $7.25. Obama didn't raise it a nickel for 8 years. Biden didn't raise it. Not only did Biden not raise it, as soon as he got in office, he said, "Oh, I was just kidding about the minimum wage," and he took it. It was the very first thing he took out of the very first bill. So he never meant it. He said, "Oh, we're going to do public option, make healthcare a little bit better, so you at least have an option to compete against private health insurance." Never even proposed it. There's a total lie. Never meant it. Paid family leave. They say, "Oh, we can't pass it." It's at 84%. If you can't pass a bill that has 84% popularity, you suck at politics. I mean, that's if you're being generous and say these are a bunch of incompetent fools. The reality is they're not incompetent. Anybody can pass a bill at 84%. You just put public pressure on anyone who opposes you. You say this is for moms that need 12 weeks off after they have a baby. What are you going to be opposed to American moms? I dare you. It would be career suicide to vote against that bill. But the Democrats never once tried to put pressure on the Republicans because their donors don't want those bills. So the establishment Democrats are a lost cause. You're not going to be able to convince them, "Oh, you know what? Hundreds of millions of dollars are not important. I'll just listen to some activists or people who really care about democracy." No, they're at this point they've become soulless corporate robots. So okay, but don't give up on the Democratic Party or this country, right? So what do you have to do? You have to find people who don't take corporate PAC money, like Bernie Sanders, Nina Turner, Ro Khanna, Cory Bush, Jamal Bowman, AOC, etc. And since they don't take corporate PAC money, and even if you're a Democrat who says, "You know, I don't love all of their policies," right? That's okay. At least they're honest. At least they're trying to serve their voters. We need a rebellion within the party for those forces of good to end democracy, to take over the Democratic Party and bring it back to what it used to be. Then the American people will love it, as they did back when we had the golden era.
All I can say is, wow. What a magnificent day that the Lord has made, and thank you all for joining me here today. You know, we are all in this together. This country, the dream it represents, we're being tested in a way that we haven't seen in nearly a century. And future generations will judge ours by how we responded to this test. Will they say this was a time when America lost its nerve? When we lost our purpose? When we allowed our petty differences, our broken politics, to plunge this country into a dark and painful recession? Or will they say this was another one of those moments when America overcame? When we battled back from adversity? When we recognized our common stake in each other? St. Louis, this is one of those moments. We've got to keep making our case for change. We've got to keep fighting for every vote. We've got to keep running through that finish line. This election's too important to take anything for granted. The future that you and I seek for our children is too important to let up now. And just remember that Americans have done this before. I look at this magnificent arch, this magnificent gateway. And it reminds me that somewhere in our past, we had a parent or a grandparent who said, "You know what? I might not be able to make it, but I'm going to go west, because if I take that chance, then maybe my child, maybe my grandchild will make it." That's what this election's about. That's what we're fighting for. And if each of you will stand with me, if you will organize with me, if you will talk to your friends and neighbors on my behalf, I promise you this: we will not just win Missouri, we will win this general election, and you and I together, we will change this country and change the world. God bless you, St. Louis. God bless you.
For the tornado in St. Louis, unfortunately, we have the same exact problems that we have overall for politics. And it's a number of factors combining together. First of all, why do we keep having once in a lifetime tornadoes and hurricanes every other year? Because of climate change. It makes the storms more severe. It's not like the scientists didn't warn us. They told us that exactly this would happen, and then it did happen, and we're still not listening to them. Why? Because big oil has bought off our government completely. So why are we having to pay all these bills? This is the cost of oil and gas industry. They're creating this externality, this extra cost. This is what I mean by democratic capitalism. Brothers and sisters, you guys want to do capitalism? Well, then you pay your own costs. I don't want to pay your costs. And they're the most profitable companies in the world because they dump their costs on us. So they should be paying for all of the bills that come out of the climate change situation, ExxonMobil, Chevron, etc. But since they've totally bribed all of our politicians, they won't. Okay, secondly, we've got politicians, again, whether they're establishment Republicans or establishment Democrats, that are totally incompetent, and that's because they weren't paid by the donors to fix things. They were paid by the donors to keep the status quo and not change a single thing. Because if you're at the top, you don't want any change at all, because then you might slip from the top. So every donor tells every establishment Democrat, don't do anything. So out here in LA, the fires are out of control, and and we've got wall-to-wall establishment Democrats in California, and they never do anything. Okay, and so another part of the problem, again, money in politics. In California, Gavin Newsom's one of his top donors is PG&E. Why do we have so many fires? Because PG&E doesn't bury their wires, and so the minute there's any kind of wind, the wires get knocked down. They fall into the forest or to nearby trees and bushes. They create a fire, and the fires go out of control. But PG&E gave Gavin Newsom a lot of campaign contributions because they didn't want to pay the cost of that. So now who's paying the cost? Again, the average citizen is paying the cost. And you think, oh, it's okay. I elected a Democratic governor and a Democratic mayor, so I'm sure they'll handle it. No, they're not handling it at all. They're doing the same thing as the Republicans because they also serve their donors. So it's so frustrating that we never get any help. And so, look, honestly, the only way out of it is to get our government back and get our democracy back in all the ways that we talked about here. So the minute you get money out of politics, when your constituents, your citizens, your voters matter more than your donors, and a hurricane comes by or a fire or a tornado, you're going to spring into action because your base of power are those voters, and those voters are demanding action. But in this current system, it doesn't matter if 212% of the voters get together. They're just going to go to one of their donors. They're going to get $2 million, $4 million, $6 million. They're going to buy every ad in the market. They're going to use mainstream media. They're going to trick you into voting for the bad guys. So that's the frustration. But luckily, like I said earlier, mainstream media's power has now waned, and they're not as magically powerful as they were before. They can't brainwash everybody as they used to. So it is a perfect time for a rebellion. And you should be. You should be in the business of rebellion. Politically, rhetorically, get out there and fight for your communities. Find clean politicians and legislators who don't take corporate PAC money, who serve you and not their donors. And that'll be the answer for these disasters as well.
Is there anything that you want to close out with? Any type of encouragement or any messages that you want to give that may be useful for people who are just looking for ways to get more involved, or just looking for ways to find some hope that things can improve?
People have often told me that the things I'm trying to do are impossible. I don't think they understand what that word means. And so, what I need everyone out there to realize is that when somebody tells you something's impossible, 9 out of 10 times, they're just telling you, don't bother trying. And by the way, a lot of times it's because they don't want you to try for their own purposes. So our media puts out the message all the time. There's no hope. Don't bother trying to do change. They're skeptical. They're cynical. They're pessimistic. Like you could make a difference. How dare you think that? What do you think? You're a great person or something? No, brother. I just think I'm one single individual. I'm telling you guys out there. You don't let them browbeat you. You don't have to be Mother Teresa to make a difference. You can just take one step. And even if you take one step, you've already taken infinitely more steps than so many other people and then that you had. It's a wonderful step forward because, guys, if we have hope in our hearts, it's shown throughout history. It's not wishful thinking. It's a stone cold fact. The minute hope becomes viral, we win and they're screwed. That's why they try so hard to keep hope down. But if you give up hope and you sit on your couch, then they have complete victory. Because as long as no one's fighting back, they'll be in power forever and ever and ever. So do just one thing. And if you like it, and by the way, in my experience, people come back and tell me all the time, man, I did that thing and it made a little bit of a difference. And I felt so good that you do a second thing and a third thing. But even if it was just one, it's so much better than doing nothing. It's fighting against the power and to bring the power back to the people where it belongs. So have hope in your heart. Go out there and fight for what you believe in. And it doesn't have to be exactly what I believe in, right? It just has to be something that animates you, that is change, and that's better for the American people and for your communities. So go out there and fight in all the right ways and fight with hope in your heart, and we will win.
America is many things to many people. To a 17-year-old kid, it's the malt shop on the corner. To Grandpa, it's the front porch in the cool of the evening. To Mother and her family, it's church on Sunday morning. And to Dad, it's his favorite relaxation. It's the Cracker Barrel philosophers in Crabtree Corners. And it's the tycoons in Wall Street. It's all races, creeds, and religions. It's freedom to work at the job you like. Freedom of speech and to peaceably assemble. Freedom to own property. Security from unlawful search or seizure.
Where's your warrant, Flatfoot?
The right to a speedy and public trial. Protection against cruel punishments and excessive fines. The right to vote. And to worship God in your own way. It is these freedoms that have made America strong.
Okay, so we got our freedom, but management's lousing up everything.
Dr. Rashad Ritchie is a well-known community activist out of Atlanta, Georgia, who has a strong background in both science and politics. He gave us some really good knowledge into how corruption in the U.S. system works, what people can do to fight it, and some inspiring instances of when the public came together and won. When stuff like this happens, obviously the poorest communities, Black and brown communities, are impacted. And one of the things that stuck out was the homeowners insurance aspect of this. In the Black community and in the city, a lot of these homes are passed down, a form of generational wealth. And you only have to have homeowners insurance if you're paying a mortgage. So many of these people don't have insurance because how do you really expect something like this to happen? So from those types of perspectives, how do these natural disaster events specifically impact the Black community across the United States? And how do you think that we should address that as a community?
Brother, that's a great question. So let me answer it this way. I want to start with the home ownership and the requirement for insurance. You're right. If you have inherited property and mom of them, they took care of the bill. You now have a property that you can live in. You can utilize it as investment property. You're not required to have that safety net known as insurance. Now, here's the dynamic. The people that pay and finance their home, that insurance isn't really for them. It seems like it's for them, but it's not. It's to protect the interest of the lender. It's to protect the interest of the lender. So the whole paradigm is structured not to truly benefit the homeowner. So that's your first space. And the way you reconcile that is by one, identifying it, acknowledging it, and realizing the number one investment that most Americans will make in their life, regardless of race will be a home. And if that's going to be the number one investment, the most expensive thing I ever buy in my life, you got to give me more for my buck. And we have to demand that at every level, if it's HOA or beyond, because that is a federal, local conspiracy. That's a federal and local conspiracy. So when disasters like this happen, it makes absolutely no sense that a city, a state, or a federal government can't do the things that you've been paying them to do. What do you expect your government to do when there's a disaster? Number one, you expect them to respond. Number two, you expect there to be safety. Number three, you expect things to move. And number four, you expect things to be remedied. Why are you paying taxation if your government can't do those things when on the rare occurrence a natural disaster strikes? And if they're not preparing for a natural disaster, what the hell are you preparing for? Don't take my money. I can prepare myself for a natural disaster. Let me keep all of my money and I'll take care of it when it comes. So these are some fundamental principles where they have us fighting over a pot of $100,000 when the truth is they gave away $1 billion to their interest and make us think that they only have this amount for us. And so we fight each other rather than fighting the system or the paradigm that created it. And so, yes, you see the dysfunction, but what the dysfunction is doing is exposing the disparity. And the disparity is a thing that remains no matter what disaster comes or doesn't come.
Can you think of any instances where, government really did step up and make a difference? And it could be locally, it could be in Georgia, when people were in need, when people lost maybe because of natural disaster or something else.
Right.
If you can name some instances where the government really did come in and play its role and play its part in instances like this.
I'm going to take you back to the Black Lives Matter movement, the height of that movement, because I'm going to make a comparative dynamic that never really makes national news, but it shows the effectiveness of government community exchange. Black Lives Matter, by starting local chapters all over the United States of America, effectively did a few things. If it had not been for Black Lives Matter, you would not have so many police departments now with a mandate for police cameras. It was their movement, it was their advocacy, it was them going to City Hall, it was them going to the county commission and demanding it. You also would not have a new law called mandate to report. There was no such thing. Mandate to report, a cop having a mandate to report another cop. That's because of the Black Lives Matter movement and them holding those jurisdictions accountable. Ben Crump has held many of these cases himself at his law firm, and we see the settlement, right? So we see the money. On the other side of that are agreements. Those agreements are typically things like mandated training, mandated body cam, mandated statutory requirement, or at least what's called a command requirement to report if you see. Now, naturally, all these things have to be enforced, and culture is still among them. The point is that the movement effectively transformed local policing without the need for federal legislation. Not one iota of federal legislation was passed in order to affect local policing out of all of this. So when police agencies change or transform or become more progressive, it is because of the same individuals who are holding the moral agenda when an injustice has happened, providing justice for those who probably believe they shouldn't say a word. And that becomes one of those dynamics where government does what it should do, but it only does it when communities hold them continually accountable outside of an election stage, outside of simply one point of advocacy over another. This has to be continual. And what eventually happens, dear brother, is that through that continual action, what takes place? Well, a whole lot of Black Lives Matter folk are now elected officials themselves. I got two of them I know personally right here in the state of Georgia. One happens to be a mayor of a city. And then beyond that, you had a record number of Black folk and women elected to the United States Congress after Trump was elected into the presidency. So that's the other side of that energy that you see happening. Why? Because they were involved in the movement and they saw things happen at a local level. They authentically had reputation locally. People respected their leadership, and all of a sudden they have an opportunity to make a difference. And that's how we do it.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And even outside of instances like that, you see, from city to city, mostly in blue states, but things like universal basic income
Yep.
programs that were put into effect. It may have just been for people who maybe were homeless. And there were great results from that to show that it increases productivity. Here in Missouri, on a ballot measure, we expanded Medicaid. Um, Also, ranked choice voting exists in a variety of local elections. Actually, that's what just happened in NYC was Zoran Mamdani's win. And I think that's another good example of the power that people really have.
Everything in nature, dear brother, has a cause and effect. It's interesting to me that the cause and effect crew, the people that will say, well, you're in this position because of this. All of a sudden, cause and effect doesn't apply when it comes to how people treat the environment. But I'll put that on the side.
All right.
Here's where we are. There are other contributing factors that are outside of man's control. For example, a few years ago, the core of the earth stopped moving. Look it up. It's all over CNN. If you want to find the interview with one of the top physicists who explained why the core of the earth stopped moving. If you believe that's a big deal or not, that's on you. But it did, and it changed some things. The days are changing. The ice caps are melting. You have different things happening. It may be cyclical, meaning the earth just goes through these changes. And because we are ignorant of the billions of years of the development of the planet, we simply may not know this is probably very natural for the planet, perhaps. So if it is, that means that you need to change with the nature of the planet then. And if there's a new area that is more flood prone than other areas, you need to change the infrastructure, invest in that infrastructure to make sure that there's a remedy when it happens. Because it's really not a natural disaster except for the fact that we build. If we did not build in that area, it would just be what? A storm. So it's where we build, it's how we build, it's the way we build that make it a natural disaster. It's just a natural occurrence. The disaster part comes in how it impacts us. And so if we're not able to take a look at our societal construct and our protective remedies by way of our elected officials or the powers that be, that means they're not looking at human life as the ultimate outcome of the policy itself.
I think a good way to close out is, just any last bits of advice that you have for people who are feeling a bit lost, who are feeling let down, disappointed by the process. If there's anything that you can leave them with for a better sense of hope in tomorrow.
Absolutely, brother. You're going to win. You won't be denied. And the reason why you're going to win, the reason why I'm completely comfortable with everything that's happening, even though I disagree with it, is because you are my future leader. And I know your heart. So you win every time. Here's what these tricksters have never been able to do. They have never been able to beat time. Their time will naturally expire. Your time will naturally start. You will be the leaders to correct the madness that they have created, which means you win. And when you win, I win.
I think, one, there's always like this veil, you know what I'm saying? Like it's always like so much stuff that you like, a lack of transparency. I think there's a lot of lying that happens. There's just a lot of lying. And as we get older, unfortunately, because we got the internet, we get to go back and fact check and we see even more lies. So not just the lies that you see now, you also see like, oh, they've been lying for forever. Like, and it get confusing, you know what I'm saying? Like, when you had the debates about, or just the perspectives where you start realizing like, Bill Clinton was a huge advocate for deportation. He was get them the out of here. That was like literally what he ran on, right?
He messed up Social Security, 3 strike laws.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like when you go back and you start realizing what, and the thing, and this is always kind of like one of the debates that we always have, where I always feel like each side is just two sides of the same coin, because it's like you couldn't tell me that. There's no way. It's hard to imagine that a Democrat would be for the exact same things at a certain time period that you end up hearing Republicans be for. And when we don't understand that, like, oh, they're all in the same building doing a lot of the same things. So that in itself, but then I also just think to be plain, as far as like just a regular everyday citizen, I think it's just like lack of tangible results. Like I think, we need just results that genuinely directly affect us. I think that's why, again, as much of an asshole as he is, one of the leg ups that Trump had was putting money directly in people's wallets. Like that had an effect on people because it was a direct, tangible result from something that was felt like he did it.
Everybody got it. Not everybody, despite the fact that things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security are vitally important, it's not something that everybody uses. So
and it's a tangible, like you need something tangible that I can feel that directly impacts my day to day. Not like, again, the stuff that, again, like you said, like it could affect me at some point. It could benefit me down the line. But right now, things are dire. You know what I'm saying? Like things are, just, like the way that the numbers are set up, it's really not that good for nobody. You know what I'm saying? They say what pretty much nobody has an emergency fund. Like everybody's a check away from poverty or destitution or homelessness. Like when things are that dire, I think that right now we need tangible physical results that, that let us know that the political process, it helps, is worth it, is meaningful. Like again, like you want to know, hey, when I cast my vote, I'm getting something for it. Like with almost every other transaction, there is an immediate return on the investment, except for pursuing your passions. Pretty much, that's like the only thing that there's not an immediate, transaction or gratification for.
After sitting down and speaking with everybody for this project, I think it's clear that what we need more than anything else is for the public to get more involved in the process, both federally and locally. With so much corrupt corporate dollars in the mix, there's really no way that we can compete with these people. There's no way that we can expect the Democrats to give us better. They'll throw us a bone, but we know that it's not going to be any better than that. And we know at this point the Republican Party is completely corrupted to the point that we simply can't work with them. So the only way for us to have positive results moving forward is if we organize, come together, put better politicians in office who don't take PAC money, who don't take corporate dollars, and who are going to be more beholden to what the public needs and what the public wants. That's the only way that humanity has ever solved its biggest problems, is by coming together. And that's exactly what we need to do right now.